It's amazing to think that I'm being interviewed today by a former Republican prisoner, Lawrence McCallum, having a full and frank debate with Lawrence about, why we made certain decisions in our lives at certain times, and I went down one particular path and Lawrence went down another particular path. I was born in Coleraine in 1953. My grandfather had been in the Royal Irish Constabulary and more latterly in the Royal Ulster Constabulary. And in fact, in 1921-22, he had been in both organisations and shifted from the one to the other whilst based in Toonbridge in County Antrim. The reason I mention him is that when I was born, my parents were working abroad, and it was largely my grandparents brought me up for the first 5 years of my life up on the north coast. When my parents came back from abroad, we then moved up to Belfast, and I spent the rest of my early years living in East Belfast area. I went to school in East Belfast, lived in East Belfast, socialised in East Belfast, and really it was only when I went to university in 1976 I can actually remember having a meaningful discussion with a member of the Catholic community. Until then, you'd been growing up in a very Protestant area where your neighbours were Protestant, where your school colleagues were Protestant, where the leisure centres were Protestant, where the libraries were Protestant, and really that is what it was all about. I studied law at Queen's for 4 years and developed an interest in criminal law in particular. And when it came to graduation in 1976, I decided to join the Royal Ulster Constabulary for a couple of years. Why did I do that? Partly, I didn't really see myself as a full-time lawyer. I felt I wanted a little bit more adventure in life in those days. My first station was in Brownlow, which I had no idea where Brownlow was when I was sent there. The trick in the human resource department of the RUC in the 1970s was to look where you came from and then send you as far as possible away from that particular place. And there was probably good reason for that, in that you wouldn't have been too familiar with the local people and you were really dealing with people away from your home community. So I then went into the community relations end of things in the 1970s and ran some of the local community relations camps in the County Armagh area in those days. I then got promoted at a relatively early age to Cookstown in 1979 and spent 2 to 3 years around that area. Policing was quite difficult in both the County Armagh and the County Tyrone area in those days because there was a high level of terrorist activity, and obviously we had to take certain precautions when going out on patrol. There could be undercar booby traps. So instead of just getting into your car that was parked outside maybe at night because you had no garage, you had to take the time and the effort to check underneath the car to make sure there was nothing there that shouldn't be there. When you were going out at night, there were certain areas that you weren't really safe to go to, and in fact you probably wouldn't have been particularly welcome in if people had known what your background was. As a result of that, police officers, I suppose, used to tend to socialise with other police officers, maybe with some prison officers, possibly members of the army. So all this did was reinforce, if you like, the sense of isolation from the communities. And it's not right to say that the police service were part of the Protestant Unionist Loyalist community. I think history would show that at many times the Protestant Unionist Loyalist community have had issues with the police service, and the police service have not been able to maybe live particularly happily in some of those areas. I served in a number of other stations throughout the force in those days, making it up to Chief Inspector level by about the 1990s or so. It was that particular time I remember doing a course with the Workers' Educational College. And I remember in the break of that 4-weekend course engaging with a young woman from the Crossmaglen area. And she knew my background and I would have known where she was from, and we got to talking, and she actually broke the ice by saying, Roger, this is the first time I've ever made a cup of tea for a member of the RUC. And that still sticks with me to this day. She I think, heard my story, and I heard her story of being stopped at army and police checkpoints around the Crossmaglen area, and maybe being made to stand at the side of the road for 1 or 1.5 hours while the army and the police checked their cars. And you're beginning to develop this thing of walking in the other person's shoes. The RUC then changed to the PSNI in 2001, and I remember being the superintendent in Ballymoney at the date of the change, and actually stayed there from over the midnight period just to witness the change as the signs of the RUC were taken down to be replaced by the PSNI signs as the uniform changed and things like that. And there's no doubt that a lot of people that had served in the RUC over the years did feel very betrayed at that stage, and have felt more and more betrayed as time has gone on. There's issues of over equivalence. Society is now sort of suggesting that the job that they did during the difficult days of standing up for law and order and for, if you like, defending the Constitution of Northern Ireland is looked upon as equivalent to the folk that were involved in the armed campaign against the state of Northern Ireland. But what do? Do you go about and do you worry and do you sort of, oh, woe is me for a long time? Or do you actually try and, remember what happened in the past, but move forward as well? I did, on leaving the police, a master's degree in human rights and criminal justice, one of which modules was about truth recovery processes and how societies moving from conflict, a little bit like our own, have moved away from that towards a more peaceful environment. But one of the things that they always underline is the importance of having that analysis of what happened in the past so that we can make a better future. I joined Healing Through Remembering about 2005. This is a very diverse cross-community group of folk that get together looking at a number of initiatives at possibly addressing our past. And indeed looking at the big and very difficult issue of truth recovery process. I think it's only when you experience something very personally that you can really feel what other folk are feeling as well. In 2005, I remember my middle son, Michael, went in for an operation in a certain hospital in Northern Ireland. It was an easy enough operation. But because something happened during that operation, unfortunately, after 2 weeks of being on a life support machine, he wasn't able to pull through. And as a result of that, we had to bury our middle child. And, you then think in terms of what other folk have felt whenever they've maybe lost a child or a loved one. In our particular case, tragic as it was, and my goodness, you can't get anything worse than losing a child, but at least the organisation put their hands up and admitted what had happened and said, it shouldn't have happened, it's our fault, lessons learnt, or whatever the case is. And I think that is really what got us through that in any sort of positive way whatsoever. People talk in terms of closure. If you do get all this information flow, if you do get the full facts of what happened, does that bring closure? Of course it doesn't bring closure, but what it does do is maybe help you deal with that loss on a daily basis. So I think it's something that wider society can maybe think about. The need for disclosure of facts, maybe the importance of knowledge as opposed to maybe retribution. And I think the fact that you have truth, maybe rather than justice, but truth, I think is a very important factor to, make this country of ours move towards a more positive place. I've been involved with the Aftermath project now for a couple of years, and it's amazing to think that I'm being interviewed today by a former Republican prisoner, Lawrence McCallum, having a full and frank debate with Lawrence about, why we made certain decisions in our lives at certain times, and I went down one particular path and Lawrence went down another particular path. I think when you engage with folk out of your comfort zone in some ways, you are taking a risk, you are taking a chance. And whilst you will be criticised by some folk for maybe getting too close to certain organisations and certain people and areas like that, other folk are able to say to you, Roger, that is the way to go. It is through dialogue, it is through putting our story over. Because at the moment, I believe that the RUC folk are a little bit on the back foot, and it's important that we project our very legitimate story out there as well, as other folk are doing it. So certainly it is something to be done, to get the story right, to get the narrative over, and to let the story be heard.